All right, we're good. Hey, everyone. We are back. I hope everyone got their coffee, their lunch, and everybody is refreshed and ready for an exciting afternoon. I get the pleasure of introducing our next speaker, Jillian Olsen, who is the owner and president of Cherry Ridge Consulting. She also happens to be my best friend, which I always say she's the smarter person in the room, because she is. But I'm going to read her bio and then let her take over. And she blushes because she is my best friend. So Jillian Olsen is the owner and president of Cherry Ridge Consulting, LLC. She is an environmental biologist and regulatory specialist with 20 years experience in the environmental consulting industry, focused on spring water resources development for the bottled water industry. Jillian is an AWS credentialed specialist and professional wetland scientist. Thus, I said she is my smart friend. Her area of expertise includes bottled and bulk water industry permitting and regulatory compliance. With water stewardship program implementation, water resource evaluation and development, and wetland identification, delineation, and permitting. Jillian is also an active Rotarian, helping her local club identify opportunities for water stewardship projects within the community. Jillian, it's all yours.
Thank you, Jen. And I'm hoping from what we can see on the screen, I know some people left during the break. It looks like everybody has jumped back in. So I'm hoping we really do have you all here with us as we get ready for the presentation. Obviously, I'm kind of doing double duty. So we don't have both of us on the screen. I'm monitoring. Also, we'll be showing my slides at the same time. So this is a bit of an interactive one. As you see, I have changed into my sampling gear since I will be providing you an overview of proper sampling techniques. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And I'm just going to remind everyone, since I'm doing everything on this end, if you jump back in, just double check that the microphone on your end has a red line through it so you stay muted. Thanks. So when you're getting ready to collect a sample, be it your annual sample or maybe a weekly bacteriological sample or a specialty sample that perhaps a customer of yours is requiring, or a special regulatory event, a monthly bromate, even your caps and containers for quarterly compliance, you want to make sure that you order your sample kit to arrive a few days before the date that you're actually wanting to sample. You also want to make sure you schedule that sample event with the appropriate personnel on your end, the ones that you've trained to collect the sample, the ones that are familiar with the site that they might be going to if it's an off-site source, or maybe you have several bottling plants. Make sure that they're going to be there that day. They're not scheduled for vacation or a personal day or an in-house training event, so that you have everyone that is familiar with the sampling available to do so. You want to coordinate the return shipment of that sample with either your courier, if you're doing an overnight shipment with a UPS or a FedEx or a DHL, or if you have the lab picking it up, make sure that they're available to do so. Also, check with your laboratory for any restrictions on days that they cannot receive the samples back. Some laboratories really do not want to receive them back on a Friday because there's preparation on their end to get those samples ready for analysis. So they can't do it, especially if there are short hold times on things like your VOCs or nitrates or BOD. So when I say, make sure you get that sample kit ahead of time. So you might receive it in a box similar to this, or something like the red cooler that you see on the slide on the screen. And you want to become familiar with that kit. So when your sample kit arrives, you want to actually open it. Don't wait until the day that you're desiring to sample or that you need to sample to meet a deadline, because you don't want to find out that it's missing a bottle that you're hoping is in there for a certain analysis. This particular style sample kit, because they ship it directly to you, ready to go, and I've kept the laboratory anonymous. They have a styrofoam cooler pack inside for you. And then all the contents are nicely packaged for us. So you'll go in and you might find that you'll have an instruction sheet and maybe some additional stickers that need to be included when you return the shipment to the laboratory. And you'll have your sample bottles as well. Something else that's very important, some labs, their sample kits, not all of them, they may include with the sample kit some freezer packs. Again, this is why you want to open it ahead of time. You don't want to be at your site opening this up and going, oh shoot, I should have frozen this. It's not going to do you much good when you have samples that require, as part of their preservation step, to be kept at a certain temperature, which requires frozen ice packs or additional ice in that kit to ship it back. These don't do you much good if they're at room temperature. So you want to have taken these out and put them in a freezer, preferably one where there's not all kinds of employee food and things. Have a designated freezer for sampling activities, even refrigerator that you can use for that. Or if that's not an option, I would double bag them in a Ziploc so they stay clean and don't have other things stuck to them when they go back in your sample kit. Because remember, your sample bottles are in there too. And you want everything to remain as clean as possible going back to the laboratory. So freeze them minimum of 24 hours. 48 would really be the preferred. Oops. Apologize. When you get ready to sample, you want to have on clean outer garments. You don't want to be attempting to do that sample on a day where perhaps the line broke at the plant. Maybe you're a smaller operation and you're the jack of all trades, where you're not only fixing the conveyor rollers or the main hub in the center of the PET line where there may be some grease involved, but you also have to collect the BAC-T sample, the VOC samples, everything else. You want to make sure you separate those activities as much as possible. If that means you have to completely change because you had to do that maintenance or emergency repair activity, then make sure you do that. I know of several smaller, medium-sized bottlers where that's the case. Personnel will take on various roles. They're the ones trained to do that. So, and they know these things can happen. So they'll have extra t-shirts, pants, or coveralls on hand specifically for having that clean outer garment available to do their sampling. You want to make sure that when you go out to sample, if it's in the plant or if possible when you arrive at the site, wash your hands with a mild soap, not scented, and warm water, or at least, room temperature or, a tepid water. I myself, because a lot of times I'm traveling, my pickup truck, I actually set up some hand wash stations. I carry 1-gallon jugs of water, usually distilled, with me, and some soap. Then you want to put on, after you dry, with some paper towels, you want to put on your powder-free nitrile gloves. Obviously come in variety. They are in high demand these days, as I'm sure most of you know. I'm going to put on my ones that I can get most easily, which are the regular blue ones. And we'll show you, and these were more readily available before 2020, because now everybody needs gloves or feels they need gloves. They should be kept for those that actually need them for activities like this or are first responders. But these ones are great if you've never seen them before. They actually have a little bit of a ribbed texture to them. They're awesome for when you're doing your annual sample events and you have those large amber glass bottles for your phenolics and some of the SVOCs or even, you know, the other large glass bottles. They have a gripping texture to them. These are my favorite gloves. Just pointing that out as a helpful tip. I know now it's easier to get the ones in large and extra large, which probably most of you on this call doing the sample, that's the size you take. I'm unfortunately a medium, which is every healthcare worker, all of our nurses primarily, they take a medium. So they're hard to find. But again, you want to wear powder-free nitrile gloves when you do your sampling. Set up a workstation for yourself if you're able to. You can see we've added a table here in front of me for this presentation. So you have a nice, clean, stable area to work if you can. If you're going out to a source spring site, I a lot of times will carry an extra cooler with me to set down next to the coolers of sample bottles that I'm filling. So it's somewhere other than the ground surface to put my filled bottles on top of as I'm doing them until I can reorganize them back into the cooler that I'm pooling empty bottles from to sample. And you also want to make sure if it's coming from, you know, a sample port, a sample tap, either in your bottling plant or your spring facility, to disinfect that sample port. It's great to have a spray bottle with isopropyl alcohol in it to just spray that sample port down really well to help disinfect and get anything off of the surface. When you're going out, and this is, I'll get into this more when we talk a little bit about the challenges with sampling for PFAS analysis, but you want to avoid the use of scented soaps and scented hand sanitizers. A lot of them come in nice fresh scents these days from different companies or have colorants in them. You don't want any of that to accidentally end up in your sample. It could cause a low level VOC hit. You know, there may be some residuals in those scents and soaps that might be derived from, you know, PFAS compound, I'm not sure. Certainly you want to avoid the use of perfumes, colognes, your Axe body spray or strongly scented, you know, Old Spice deodorant that day. You also want to avoid the use of insect spray and sunblock. I know this from my years as an environmental consultant. Where we can, we take our risks with the sun and with insects for different sampling events. There's been documentation that some of the residuals from those products, if they're on your skin as well as you try, sometimes you accidentally will touch the top of your arm or things like that while you're sampling. And those insect sprays or sunblock, especially if you're sweating, it's warm outside, if you get them into your NEBWA vials for your VOCs analysis, they can cause a low level hit if you're doing your detection levels very low. And while it may not cause a regulatory concern, you don't want to see that because then you'll be scratching your head wondering, where did this come from? Uh-oh, there we go. Sorry, slides froze. You want to be sure to allow your water at the sample tap to flow for several minutes. You also don't want to touch the inside of the sample bottle or lid while you're sampling, or the exterior of the sample port to the bottle or the lid, and place the lid immediately on the sample bottle after the filling is complete. So just as a way of demonstration, I'm just going to grab one of our nice little sample bottles out of here. This one just happens to be an unpreserved bottle for inorganics. And when you're doing this, what I mean is you want to be very careful when you remove that lid. You don't want to be touching, in case you've accidentally bumped any other surface after you put your gloves on and taken that time to wash your hands. You don't want to, you know, contaminate in any way your bottle that came from the lab, presumably clean. They do come clean, but that is, you know, that's what you're presuming. So you want to be very careful of that during your sampling procedures. When you're filling your VOC vials, which this happens to be the kit for VOCs that came with this particular sample cooler, review any instructions that are provided by the lab. Certain laboratories will provide the vials already containing the hydrochloric acid preservative, HCl. Others will require you to add that to your vial partway through. This particular laboratory will tell you to fill the vial approximately 2/3 full, and then add the HCl. I believe it's 5 or 6 drops to get the appropriate amount, and then continue filling the vial. These sorts of bottles must be filled very slowly at a low flow volume, and you're going to overfill them slightly to form a meniscus, and then cap them gently so that there's no air bubbles. I'm sure many of you have done this a million times. Depending on the type of day you're having, they can be a pain in the butt to fill, as I'm sure you're aware, to get those no air bubbles in there when you're doing it. I'm going to pretend the HCl is in this one, only because I'm in a not large room with not a lot of air circulation. I'm not going to play with it. But just to demonstrate again, you know, the best way to do this, I'm going to go ahead and pretend I'm sampling from a sample port from you guys. So you're going to, you know, hold your cap and bottle. Best way to do this to help prevent some of those air bubbles is to kind of hold your bottle in your sample stream of water, kind of a 45-degree angle. Don't worry, I don't know if you guys can see it. I have a baking dish down here so I don't get Jen's office all wet. And again, you want to do a low flow. Inevitably, you are going to get some rinse on the outside of the bottle. Now here I have the flow, the water just about to the top of the bottle. If you're able to turn down your sample flow enough that you can kind of dribble in and get that meniscus right on the top, you're good to go. You can also very cautiously add a little bit into the cap and pour it very slowly. When the bottles come with the preservative already in them, or if you've had to add it midway through, you want to be sure not to overflow the bottle and lose that preservative. That's very important. So you're going to, as best you can, put that cap straight on. This is the test to make sure I can do this. Twist it in there. Turn that bottle upside down. It's probably hard for you guys to see on camera because of the amount of label on here. You want to tap it gently on your hand and inspect it. Make sure you don't have any air bubbles left. Because again, this is for your volatile organics. So you want to trap them in the bottle so that if there is anything present, it's in there when it gets to the lab and they can properly draw the sample out of there. So you know whether or not you have an issue. And just as a full disclosure, I've been holding on to this particular sample kit for quite some time. In preparation for giving this presentation, it was a project that ultimately was put on hold for too long, and I'll need to order a new one because any preservatives that are in here are just too old. This sample kit is really no longer viable at this point. Any of your other sample bottles, such as this one, We have multiple other bottles in here. This particular one I'm trying to get out to show you is stuck. There's many other bottles in here. You do not rinse them in any way, the exterior of them, prior to filling. You don't want to overfill them. Like I said, they may have preservative in them. This particular one does have a preservative. It's kind of a powdered preservative in there. You don't want to overfill and lose that preservative in any way. You want to fill to the shoulder of the bottle. That is basically this area before it comes up the neck. That way, when the lab opens it, it doesn't spill out on them. That's basically these bottles, when they say they're 500 milliliters, like this one is, that's where that measurement comes up to. So that's the volume the lab needs. And obviously cap it securely. You don't want it tipping over in the cooler when FedEx is throwing it around in the back of the truck. And losing the sample that you so cautiously collected. Now, as we heard from Steve yesterday, sample collection, when you're going to analyze for PFAS compounds, PFOAs, and all of their friends, presents its own challenges. The PFAS compounds are found in many of the products we use, even in standard sample collection. Chemical ice bags, so those soft bags that you can also get, not the hard freezy packs, but those softer gel pack ones, some of those may contain PFAS samples. Sticky notes, happen to have a pad of those here, so they don't stick together too well, may contain them. So you don't want to have sticky notes on any of your sample containers. I grabbed this to bring along just to show you, and anyone on here, if they've joined today that might be an environmental consultant. I know we have a few that are registered or may view this later. Our waterproof field books that we love so darn much, that we take all of our notes in. These actually may contain PFAS chemicals, probably in the material coating on the paper to make it waterproof, so we can write in the rain. So that being the case, I know myself when I've done PFAS sample collection for clients, I actually keep track of things as far as the times of sample collection in a separate just paper notebook. Rather than write in this field book for fear of any sort of cross-contamination, and then I'll go back and put it in this once those samples are out of my hands. Any equipment using non-stick material, waterproof suits and boots, as Steve quizzed us on yesterday morning. Gore-Tex being the most popular brand name of those sorts of materials. Again, sunscreens, insect repellents, you don't want to use them. Don't use a felt tip pen, aluminum foil. Brand new clothing may contain some of those chemicals. A lot of our personal hygiene products and clothing that was laundered in fabric softener. So really a big challenge when you're going out to collect your samples. Some steps that you could take to try to ensure a more optimal sample condition is wearing a non-PFC treated suit when you go out. Kind of look like those Tyvek suits. Try to keep anything that's on you contained and away from the sample. As we know, PFAS chemicals can come off of any of these hygiene products, anything you have on you. They can be in the air and airborne, and just be, contaminant in the environment where you are sampling. Do not use any fluorinated hygiene products on the day of sampling. This includes shampoos, dental floss, nail polish, eyeshadow. It's a good excuse, for your dentist as to why you haven't flossed when you go in for your cleaning. Sorry. Have to do my PFAS sampling, can't risk it, don't want to have low detections. I know for me personally, I have quite a few clients now who have asked me to assist in the PFAS sample collection that get the glory of seeing me with no makeup on. Luckily, most of them we've done on very non-hot, humid days because I take every precaution that I could do. I will not put deodorant on before we go out to do the samples. It gets pretty unglorious when you go out, but when you're trying to make sure that you take every precaution possible, those are the steps you need to be taking. You also do not want to handle or consume any packaged food on the day of sampling. So I hate to say it, but I mean, certainly you could probably drink that cup of coffee at home from a standard coffee maker with your unbleached coffee filter in a ceramic mug, but you're not stopping at Dunkin' or Starbucks. You're not getting a Burger King sandwich, you know, on the way there. Certainly not a Subway for lunch before you do any of your sampling. It's going to be a rough day. And if your sample requires the use of a pump or tubing, you want to use inert materials. This means stainless steel. And if you have tubing you need to use, it must be HDPE. The softer plastic tubings do contain PFAS. You don't want to risk the potential of that leaching into your sample. Anyone that's had to use the hard HDPE tubing, it's not fun to try to work with. It's difficult to cut. And there's extra steps with that as well, disinfecting your knife in between samples from cutting the tubing, things of that nature, and making sure that knife is new and clean. But again, everything you can take, because the detection levels are now have to be so low because of all of the different state regulations requiring such a low level. And also, the laboratory will supply a field reagent blank that you must collect while you're out there. I do have an example with me from a leftover from a kit of a recent PFAS sample collection event that we did. This particular laboratory, each sample itself required 2 bottles at each sample site. They come in their own plastic bag for each sample. Then we fill both bottles up, put them back in the plastic bag per sample. I've actually only ever done it with this particular laboratory, so I don't know how all of them handle it, but I believe all of them, it's usually the 2 smaller bottles. The field blank was the same way. They provide you with the laboratory grade. It's similar to a distilled water, but I think it's gone through additional steps. Steve might be able to jump on and expand on that, to fill the bottles with. You want to pick, you know, a location at your site if you've had maybe multiple sample locations, if it's like a source water or something like that, or a new site you're exploring for it. Picks maybe a central location. If it's your bottling plant, then wherever you know your sample port is, you want to do it right there. It needs to be representative of the condition. That way you will know if there's something in the ambient environment that could potentially be giving you that PFAS hit, if you will, if you have some sort of low level detection. And for us, you know, for the bottling community, I always say a low level detection because we don't see a lot of it. The evidence that's come back so far, there haven't been all that many, but the way that we, you know, what we know right now, the different state levels that are coming out, they are really low. So we need to just be extremely cautious. So that is what I have for you for today. Mine is, you know, obviously pretty short and sweet. I didn't want to go into too much. I think we have at least one question I thought I saw pop up. Let's see here. I have one question from Dave Reddick. Thank you for this. How long should they run the sample flow before sampling? If you're running from a dedicated sample port, at your bottling plant or at your source water, that's your typical sample port. My recommendation is to let that flow for at least several minutes. My usual is 5 minutes. Really get the line flushed and make sure that you're getting a fresh sample, not what's laying in the line for that particular location. And you may be able to gauge that better based on your facility. If that sample port is a long pipe run distance from where the water is coming in or coming from, if it's like at the end of a finished product line or somewhere midstream, and you know you have several feet length of pipe, 4-inch diameter, you might want to let that run for more than 5 minutes to make sure that the water you have coming out of that sample port is fresh. And not something that's just been sitting in that pipe. If you are taking a sample that's requiring a pump, maybe down your borehole, or your spring source catchment, that's more of a true raw sample, what you want to do is do a typical purge volume, 3 volumes of that well casing or that catchment size. So, 1 volume is the diameter of the well and the depth to water calculation, and you want to figure out what 3 volumes is. So that could be anywhere from, depending on the pumping rate, and usually do it at a slightly lower flow, several gallons a minute, up to maybe 10 gallons a minute, not your typical maybe 65 gallon a minute pumping rate if you're using the source. You might be purging for anywhere from a half an hour to an hour before you collect that sample. Great question, Dave. Thank you.
Jillian?
Yes.
Tara. Just by coincidence, my PFAS sample kit came in this morning, right after we quit. And it's got 12 bottles, 4 of which are the sample blank bottles, the 2 filled and the 2 that you need to do, and 4 others that they don't quantify very well how they give me numbers, but one of them doesn't even match my public water sample number, so I guess I have to call them on that. They didn't include the gloves, and they didn't include any ice either. So this will be an interesting thing, sending this back to them. But it's the kit is here, and as I said, there's 12 bottles here.
Gotcha. So if they don't include ice packs, you can use packaged ice. What I typically do with packaged ice, and it has nothing to do with the fact that the package itself coming from the ice manufacturer would have anything wrong with it. It's that you probably bought it at your local convenience mart, and who knows how it's been handled while it was there. I take, with gloved hands, take the ice out of there and put it in clean Ziploc bags.
Okay.
And then put those Ziploc bags, I usually double bag it so it doesn't leak.
Yeah.
Put those Ziploc bags in the cooler to ship it back. That's my standard protocol.
And one other question, the sampling tap for this is right on like the road edge. The sampling tap for the water. It's like on the road edge. Is there any other precautions to take having it so close to the road edge in sampling?
I don't know that I don't know that you really can. I think you're kind of stuck there with that in that particular situation. Is it like a hose bib type port, or?
No, it's an actual sampling tap that they put into the main water line and then drew up, and it's a sampling tap that you can draw the water out of. So it can be run. I mean, it's not a problem with running it and doing all of that. It's just that where it happens to be located is near the near the edge of the road, because you had to be near the main water line to tap in.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. I think, you know, other than make sure you don't set those bottles down on the road surface, do everything you can to, I'll call it, maintain control of the bottles and what they touch.
Yep.
Is the best thing that you're going to be able to do. And obviously take your ambient field blank samples right there.
Yep. Okay.
That's a challenging one here. And wear your safety vest, please.
Will do. Thank you, Jillian.
You're welcome. I saw a few in the chat. If I can get back to them now. Sorry, bear with me. Jen left me, so now I'm trying to control it all myself. I know one, no, I'll just read them because I know what showed up and next time I can't get back to it. Steve Tischler noted that the reagent water that's provided is tested for the PFAS before it's shipped out. So that's how they know that what they're sending you is good to go before you use it. So if it comes back with detections, then it's from your ambient environment. And Steve, I don't know if maybe you can help me out with the answer to this. Jason Huxley asked, and I'm not 100% positive, if PVC piping has the potential to contain PFAS. That would affect the sample.
Yeah, I'm going to say no to that.
Okay.
Yeah, generally not.
Okay, thank you. I think that's it.
I will say, you know, we all know that new construction, PVC pipe new construction can cause all sorts of other kinds of contaminants on the volatile side.
That is a very good point. Are there any other questions or comments? Everybody's an expert at sampling?
I had one other thing.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, the contamination from perfumes and so forth can cause total phenols to be over the 1 part per billion level. So he had mentioned like volatiles and so forth, but the total phenols is one of the things that we're mainly concerned about when it comes to like perfumes and things like that.
Yes. Basically, I always think of when I go out sampling, when I know I'm going to be sampling that day, I go out as if, and this may resonate with some of you, as if I'm going hunting, as scent free as possible. No use of anything is the best way to think about it to lessen any potential for those. As a funny, and this has nothing to do with bottled water, but it has to do with sampling. A funny aside that gives you an indication of how detrimental something like a perfume can potentially be to your samples. I was doing a remediation of a site that was, it was underground storage tanks that caused a massive release. And we were doing excavation, cleanup, soil cores, and we were using a photoionization detector to get an indication of where the worst contamination was, to sample and figure out where it's the worst and then get to our clean zone. So we knew we could stop digging. And that is detecting your, basically an indication of your volatile organics. Well, the property owner, wonderful older lady who really loved her perfume. I had to keep reminding her that she could not come near our sample station because the minute she would walk over, she would screw up the photoionization detector just from her perfume level. And the amount that she was emitting, that I would then have to let it basically what they call cool off, get it back down to my baseline so that I could sniff the soils and figure out what's going on. So definitely you know, if you can smell it, it could potentially get in your sample and cause some sort of an issue. As Steve just mentioned, the total phenolics as well. We have a question from, okay, Dan says disregard. Are you sure, Dan? Okay.
Hey, Jillian, this is Jason.
Go ahead, Jason.
You mentioned so many things that could have PFAS or PFAS chemicals on them. If that's the case and we're washing our hair and putting makeup on, or you might be putting makeup on, I'd look a little funny with that, but why are the regulations so low for water? I know that's probably not your forte. I'm just curious if anybody has an idea about that. That's it.
I think any of us wish we could answer that question.
New ideas up her sleeve, but maybe just not enough time to realize them all, I guess.
Hold on. I don't know that there's much rhyme or reason behind it. I think that this is my opinion. I don't have a backup source for this, but I think when a lot of the regulations, when they first started being developed by some of the states that did it early on, the reason that they was because they knew there was an issue in groundwater that was potentially public water supply, municipal supply. And there were quasi-known sources from manufacturing or military base facilities that may have been the originator of the issue. And my thought process is that we're realizing the more places that these chemicals have been used and may be found. Well, probably, I mean, we knew where they were found. We know, what they've been used in, but that they may, become a presence when now we're trying to sample at things that are such a low level based on what the regulations have been put in place to deal with it and figure it out. And now we're, trying to chase this down. So that's my opinion, if you will. I don't have a document to back that up, but that's what I would think is kind of what's led us to this point.
Well, the limits were not set based on the potential for cross-contamination during sampling. I mean, that certainly wasn't an issue to set the limits. They were mostly set out of an abundance of caution and at such low levels to avoid, I think, appearing as though the limits were set too high. I mean, they're being found in many sources at very low levels. And the other thing is that the method itself has such a low detection level capability that a lot of the values are set, just above that threshold so that they can be detected. So it wasn't, though, for the purpose of cross-contamination, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Steve, Jason again. Do you know of any other food companies that regulate at this level for these chemicals?
Not that I'm aware of. You don't really, you hear about it mostly in the context of public water supplies. The states are on about source water and public water supplies, but not really much in the food industry. I mean, the food industry itself is responsible for the contamination just due to its packaging.
So it's okay to eat it, but not drink it.
Well, generally, you're not supposed to ingest it. That's true, and I haven't seen any established limits for ingestion. I just know that the limits that they're setting for drinking water, which is probably the most common source of getting it in your system.
Unless you wash your hair or put on makeup.
Well, it's in those products for sure. I mean, as I said yesterday, they have identified it as bioaccumulative, and they've certainly set the alarms about its levels. So I'm sure if most people that were tested for it, it would be some level of detect.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm personally more concerned with the fact that I was a big user of the non-stick aluminum foil for grilling, which now you can't find, by the way.
How about the pots and pans? They all have it on it too, don't they?
Well, the coatings themselves, like Teflon, Teflon is a polymer of PFAS chemicals. It's not, I say not PFAS itself, but it's the polymer version of PFAS made from PFAS precursors.
But as you wash it or scrub it, it probably has some exposure.
Sure, potentially.
I don't use those. Straight stainless steel. Does anybody have any additional questions? Let's see if we have any. I second that, Dan. I've also really missed Felix. Coming up in the chat box.
Well, I'm happy that I could provide the abundance of caution phrase.
Okay, well, hearing and seeing no other questions, I am going to stop my share for now. Thank you, Doreeth. And get set up. Our next presenter will be David Moscato.